morning, everybody. I am Abby Elizabeth, and this is the Earthen Vessels YouTube channel. This channel is for Christian women, but anyone is welcome to listen. Today I want to talk to you, my sisters, about how to stay alive during a power outage without killing yourself. And I know that that's a little bit humorous, but actually this is not a funny situation. Those of us who live in this world, particularly those of us who live in the northern climate right now, are seeing a number of incidents with the weather that are unique, that we're not used to. Now, I grew up in the north. I am familiar with cold weather and what to do to survive a power outage. It's something that we in the north know about and are prepared for. But people in the south, in the southeast or the south of the United States, verily don't deal with this very often. And so many of you have been going through some trials because of the weather and power outages. So I thought to make a video today to help everyone understand what we can do to stay alive in such situations and do so in a way without spending a lot of money. Now, the first thing I want to say is that right now you might not have the ability to get a lot of supplies. And some of the things that I'm going to recommend don't require really for you to purchase anything. There are some things that we can all do already without having to purchase anything. However, now that we're seeing the things changing, the weather in particular changing in the world right now, and that the power grid is unreliable, we want to take note of that and be prudent and prepare for things to be different than they have been in times past. Verily, we have all become accustomed to jumping in our car and driving someplace when we want something, or jumping on a bus. We're used to coming in the house and turning on a light switch and having light, and turning up the thermostat and have it be warm, turn on a faucet and have running water. And verily, those things may not always be there, and they may go away for a short period of time or for a long period of time. And we who are prudent want to prepare. So I just want to begin today in Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 3. May the Lord bless the reading of his word today. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. We don't want to say, oh, that could happen someday, but it's not going to happen to me, or it happens in this area and not in that area. We want to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So we don't go around trying to kill people to protect our supplies, but we are prudent because we can't help anyone if we're in a crisis ourselves. So preparation for difficulties is not to mean that we don't trust in the Lord. We trust in the Lord, but we also look well to the way that we're in, and we consider the realities of what might happen so that we don't suffer, and also so that our children and other family members are taken care of. Glory be to God. So without further ado, I have a number of things that I want to go over with you. And please be patient. There's quite a few items, and I hope that this is a blessing to those of you who have not learned these things. So the first thing I would say is that if you have a car, it's very easy to think, oh, if the power goes out, I'll just go out in my car and then I'll be warm. The problem with that is that a car is only useful as long as it has gasoline in it. And if you're in an ice storm, you're not going to be able to drive the car anywhere because of the ice, or if there's a huge amount of snow. The truth of the matter is a car is only useful to the degree to which it is able to have fuel in it. And even if we have fuel in a gas can, in the event, to prepare for such a thing, that still gas does burn, and eventually it won't be there anymore. So relying on a car to keep you warm is not something that you want to have your only plan B. You want to have other ideas about what you do. Furthermore, using a car charger to charge your cell phone or computer, that might work as long as you have gas in your car. But if you don't have gas in your car, it's not going to work. So you want to have other ways to charge your cell phone in particular so that you can keep in communication with people. So that is the first item that I'd like to talk about. Now, this is something that I got for free. It was something that was part of a sales pitch on the internet, so I got it for free. But these are not expensive to buy. It's a solar cell phone charger. You can charge more than one device for this. You can get this charged either by charging it through the what's it called? Well, I can't remember the word right now. You know, the thingy that you plug into your computer. Well, anyway, you can charge it that way on your computer, or you can put it in a windowsill, and the windowsill will cause it to be charged. So I'll show you just by turning a lamp on here that what you see now is that this is now lit up from the light of the lamp, but the sunlight will do it also. So that is something that will make us be able to indefinitely be able to charge our phone, and then we'll be able to communicate with people, and that's very important. Glory be to God. Now, I mentioned that we don't want to rely on our car to keep us warm. It's fine if in an emergency, if you have a car. Not everyone has a car. So what we want to do is we want to understand how it is to keep the family or ourselves, if we live alone, warm in a winter power outage. The first thing is to isolate yourself and the family in one room. So you would drag mattresses into one room so everyone is in the same room and close off the rest of the house. A house is easier to heat when it's small. And during a power outage, if you can close off all the rooms but one and have the entire family in one room, that will go a long way to being able to stay warm. The second thing I would say about that is that once you've got everybody into one room and people's needs, everything that they're going to need is in the room. So things like clothing, mattresses, bedding, blankets, and so forth. As much as possible, you want to remain in that one room. So you want to instruct family members and children to gather what they're going to need. And you want to, of course, supervise those decisions with your children so they don't drag unnecessary clutter into that one room. The next thing you would do then is to cover the windows with blankets. So I'm going to talk to you about how to do this. I recommend, before there's a power outage, to get this kind of hook. It's a brass hook, and it screws in to the wall. You just screw hooks like this into the corners of your windows and just leave them there. Then what you can do is you can take a pin like this. So this is a diaper pin. You don't have to use a diaper pin, but I like them because they don't come apart. And the weight of a blanket can pull a safety pin apart. You simply take the pin, whether you have a diaper pin or not, and you pin it into the corner of the blanket like that. And then you have the hook on the window, and then you can just hang the blanket up. So if you're in a situation where there's a power outage, you can cover the windows with ease. You don't have to be thinking about tacking them up. This is very easy to accomplish. You can measure the distance of how long your window is and space your pins accordingly. It's sometimes a good idea, if you have a large window, to also have a hook in the middle of the window as well, so that it's covered completely. And the idea with that is that glass lets cold air in. It's something that will cause your house to be much colder, especially at night. So at night, you want to cover the windows with a blanket. However, during the day, if there's sunlight coming in through the window, then that will help to warm the house. So then you would want to remove the blanket at that point. We can also cover our doors with a blanket in this manner. And the reason we cover our doors in this way, rather than using tape or anything like that, is because we might need to go outside. So it's very easy to unhook a blanket when we're doing this method and go outside, and then when we come back in, we can cover it back up. It's an easy way to have it be accessible to us. So doors are one thing that are a huge leak of cold air into a house. And again, when we're isolated in one room, we want that to be the main room that we're in. So we don't want to have to open up our living space and go walking through the whole house to get outside, because that's just not practical. It's better to be closer to the door. So when we cover the door with a blanket, that helps to keep the house warm. The other thing we would want to do is roll up a towel and place it at the base of the door. Often the bottom of the door is a source of leaking air. Finally, I would say that with windows, and this is something that I would recommend doing in the fall. If you live in the north, we do this in the fall in the north. But to get this is rope caulk, and it's basically material that's very flexible, and you can stuff it into the cracks and holes of windows. And so this is very good to use because it doesn't damage the window. It doesn't take the paint off. And so it's a way to, in a power outage, to make sure that you're warm, but it doesn't damage the windows. And those of you who rent apartments, you do want to be careful about that, because the landlord isn't going to be happy if you've torn the paint off the windows. Now, I want to talk about heat sources that are not a generator. Now, if you have a generator, that's wonderful, but generators can also be dangerous because they usually burn gasoline or propane or something like that. And they need to be kept outside. You can't have a generator like that in the house, because you can end up dying from carbon monoxide poisoning in your attempt to not freeze to death. So if you have a generator, you have to know how to safely use one. And that means in most cases it needs to be outside. However, most people don't have generators, and so we want to understand how it is that we can stay warm without generators. There's a few things that are very easy to do. It's necessary to prepare a little bit for some of these ideas, but not all of them. Candles warm a house. So if you have the family all in one room, if you're burning a candle, that will help to heat the room. It's not going to make it, like tropical balmy weather, but it is going to help. There are things, though, that we can do to increase the effect of a candle. The first one is this. So I'm going to show you something. Now, this, you don't have to have something like this. I found this at a thrift store, and it was a real find. But basically, this is a metal rack that has a little cup with a tea light in it. So it's a tea light candle. And this holds that candle. And then this is a copper, very thin copper teapot that sets on top. And so this is a very effective way of heating water. Now, when we heat water, the water can be used for tea. It can be used for things like noodle soup, oodles of noodles or ramen or what have you. And that's a very good way to stay warm, is to drink hot tea and to have some kind of soup. However, there are even better ways that we can use hot water to sustain ourselves in a power outage and not freeze to death. The first one is, and this usually doesn't need much preparation, is to get a water bottle, like a liter water bottle, and heat up water in something like this, and then fill the water bottle, screw on the cap very tightly, and then wrap that water bottle in something light, like an old t-shirt. Now, what I would say about this, you don't want to make the water boiling if you're using a plastic water bottle, of course. But you would want it to be sufficiently hot so that then the bottle is a heat source. You cover it with cloth, maybe an old t-shirt or something made from an old t-shirt. And then you can place that in a sleeping bag, if you have one, at the feet, and another one for near the core or the chest area of the body. And that will save your life in many cases. Having hot water in a hot water bottle in your sleeping situation will often save your life, because most people in winter power outages who freeze to death when they're asleep. And so we want to be careful when we're going to sleep to stay warm, particularly if we're alone. Because, of course, if we have a husband and we can cuddle up next to him, well, then we're going to warm him up and he's going to warm us up. And the children can even climb in with us to be warm. But if we live alone, it's really important to have a heat source other than our own body. The other thing I would say about this, just a moment, I have to get something. Pardon me. This is a hot water bottle that you can purchase online. They cost about $10. So, or you can buy them, at the CVS or the pharmacy. And basically what this is it's made out of rubber. It's got a screw cap, and you can pour the water into there. Of course, be careful. You don't want to burn yourself. But with something like this, you can use a little bit hotter water, and then you cover it tightly. And then you can cover this with a pillowcase. And this will stay warm a little bit longer than just a plain old water bottle that you buy, for water. So this is a very practical item to have because it can save your life. You can put it inside your sweater or your coat if you have to go outside. And if it's covered, it will stay warm for a long period of time. So when it's placed in the bed, when you're sleeping, it will be warm in the morning when you wake up. In terms of candles, there's a few things I want to say about them. First of all, they should always be in a candle holder. So not necessarily just a glass jar or a mug that you have, although mugs are probably safer than a drinking glass. Still, you want to have a candle in a safe container so that you get the light from the candle, but if the wax leaks, it's not going to start a fire. You also want to set the candle on something that is not combustible, like a metal tray. So in the event that the candle gets knocked over and the hot wax pours out, that it's not going to start a fire. You want the candle to be away from things like curtains or blankets hanging on the windows, and away from pets or children that might knock them over. And of course, even we adults want to remember to be very careful with fire. We don't burn candles or any kind of flame when we're asleep and there's two reasons. One is fire, but the other one is carbon monoxide. So when we're using candles for heat, we want to not seal up every window completely like hermetically sealed. We want to have some air coming in, and that doesn't mean we have a window open. It might mean that one of the windows we don't caulk, and we might feel a little breeze coming from one of the cracks. And then we know that oxygen is coming into the house. When we're using a camping stove in the house, I want to caution you, my sisters, about this, because many cooking fuels that are used for camping are meant to be used outside. They are not meant to be used in a house. And so they're toxic. The smoke that comes from them are toxic. And you don't want to be breathing toxic fumes when you're trying to survive a power outage, because rarely that can kill you too. The other thing is things like lamp oil or kerosene. Now this is a lamp that has lamp oil in it. And that's wonderful to use. You can see that this has a good solid base. It's sturdy. It's not easily knocked over. But still, when we use something like that, we want to have it on either a plate or a metal tray so that if it gets knocked over and the oil gets spilled, that the fire that ensues will be contained. Again, these things should be used with caution. They should be placed in an area where pets and children can't knock them over, and where we can't accidentally knock them over. We also want to remember to use them sparingly, because things like kerosene and lamp oil, again, that smoke isn't good for you to breathe. And we want to have a little bit of air coming into the house if that's what we are using. So glory be to God. Next, this is, now some of these things you do have to purchase. And what I would say is that if you're going through a power outage now, or you have recently, or you think you might, we all need to kind of wake up and smell the coffee at this point. The things that we've relied on in the past, we may not be able to rely on anymore. So we want to have sources of heat and light and power that we can generate the power for those things ourselves. And many of these items are very inexpensive to purchase. So you can buy a bunch of candles at the dollar store for $1. You can buy something like this on the internet for a very small amount of money. And this is a lantern that is a hand crank. So you can charge it yourself just by turning the handle. And then when you open it, that is a very bright light. And that's not something that has to be plugged in. All it needs is a little elbow grease and you've got light. And light is very important. We sometimes need to see where we're going. We want to be able to see when we're going outside. We want to see where we're walking. We don't want to slip and fall. And so this is something that's very important to have. Another thing that's important to have, now this is a small one, but this is a thermos. And it's for a hot drink. So when we make a hot drink using our candle cooker, we want to remember that we want to conserve that hot thing. You know, when we're living in a heated apartment or a heated house and we make some hot coffee, we might set that on an electric cup warmer, or we might simply just make some more hot water if it gets cold. But if in a winter power outage, we want to conserve the heat that we're using. So having a thermos is really important, and we can then keep it hot while we're drinking it. And this has a cover on it as well, so that helps to keep the heat in as well. We want to have things on hand like tea and hot chocolate for the children, things like that. Glory be to God. Now, I want to, and I'm going to go into, I know some of you are saying, well, I don't have a rack like that. Well, I'm going to get to that in just a minute. What I would say is that we want to be able to be creative in an emergency. We want to be able to think through a crisis and find ways to do things, even if it's not something that we bought for that purpose in particular. So I'm going to give you an example. One thing you can do is, this is a clay pot. You can take 2 clay pots and set a wire rack from your stove or from something else over it. So you have 2 of these. I don't have 2, but you get the picture here. And you can have a candle underneath it. And then you can set something on the rack in order to heat it, like a teapot. The other thing you can use is this. This was actually a fondue contraption. So fondue, of course, is when we heat up things like cheese to dip vegetables in when we're having a fancy party. I've never done that, but I've heard that people do. So what this is that this has, a base, and you can set it on the base, and it has room for a candle. And then we take a candle and we put it there, so like a votive candle. And I have votive candles, but I don't have them in front of me, but they're about that big. And so the candle would fit there, and we would put it, of course, in a candle holder and put the candle in there. And then what we do is we would cover this. This here is 2 clay pots. So I purchased these to be able to fit this. So this is something that takes a little bit of work. But the thing is with this is that the clay pot, the clay absorbs the heat from the candle. It's like a little oven. It warms it, and then even when the candle is put out, the heat continues to emanate. And you can layer this with another pot, and that has an even greater effect. The only thing I would say about this, my sisters, and there are videos on YouTube about how to make such a heater. Be very careful with them because they get very hot. And if they get too hot, they can cause a fire. And we want to make sure we use a candle holder for the candle so that if the wax melts completely, it won't spill out and cause a blaze. But the other thing is we want to be careful not to overuse it. We want to use it to the point where the clay pots get nice and hot and then turn off the candle. Because first of all, we don't want to waste our candles, but secondly, we don't want to create a hazard. We want to not be burning a lot of things unnecessarily. The whole point of such a heater is to not have to burn the candles constantly. And in that way, you can heat that up. and it will heat the room for several hours even after the candle has gone out. Glory be to God. Glory be to God. We who live in the West are very used to having running water and a toilet that flushes. We want to be careful during a winter power outage to do what we can to prevent our pipes from freezing. So one thing we can do is wrap towels around the exposed pipes and just tie them with an old ripped up rag. Just wrap a towel around the pipe and then tie a rag around that to make sure it's secure. The other thing that's important to do is to have a steady small stream of water coming through each of your taps. When the water is flowing, it's less likely to freeze. Finally, in terms of a toilet can be flushed manually by dumping a bucket of water into the toilet. So even if you lose water, in most cases you can still flush it if you do that. However, that requires a water source, and we don't always have that, but I thought I'd make mention of it. If we are aware that a power outage is on its way, we can fill up the bathtub so that we have water to flush the toilet with. And we also want to have some water stored up anyway. It's not wise to have no water, because in the event of a power outage, you don't want to have to be going around trying to find water. Especially if there's ice, because if there's ice, you're going to have a lot of peril in trying to walk around and get water. So it's good to have at least a few gallons per person on hand in order to get you through the initial part of the power outage, and then you can make plans once you realize what's happening. But again, it's important to have a solar cell phone charger, because in that way you can keep up to date on weather reports and so forth and so on. Of course, we want to have things like lighters and matches so that we can light our candles. And I would not only rely on lighters. Lighters have a way of not being reliable at the worst possible moment. It's good to have the kind of kitchen matches that light on the side of the box as an alternative, and keep that box of matches in a Ziploc plastic bag so that they're not wet or damp when you need them. Glory be to God. Now I want to talk about clothing. We who live in the North understand a basic principle about staying warm in cold weather, and that is the idea of layers. When you wear a layer and another layer and another layer, it puts a cushion of air in between each layer. And that air then is an insulator. So you can wear something really, really warm, but if you only have one layer, it won't be as effective as if you had two layers. So what I recommend to people who are not prepared or haven't done this before is to think about wearing something light underneath their clothing. Women, it could be something like tights or yoga pants or something like that, long underwear, thermal long underwear, silk long underwear. To wear something like that, and then over that put a layer of something like flannel pajamas or sweatpants and a sweatshirt. Hoodies are the best because hoodies also keep your neck warm. But if you don't have a hoodie, that's okay. The other thing is that the more layers you have, the better, because if you start to get too hot, you're going to sweat and then you're going to be wet. You don't want to be wet because that will be cold. So when you're wearing layers, if you start to feel yourself sweating, you can take a layer off and then add it again when you get cool again. And in that way, you don't have to disrobe and change into dry clothing or have dry clothing available. It's just far better to dress in layers. The other thing I would say is that the primary ways the body loses heat is through the head, the hands, and the feet. So most important to cover is the head. So we want to, underneath our veil, of course, wear a warm beanie underneath, and then cover our head with a nice warm veil and a scarf around our neck. And then we can put a hoodie over that. If we do that, we'll stay much warmer than if we just have a veil on, my sisters. Also, gloves. Now, gloves are great if you're working. So if you're working and you need to have your fingers, they're great. But they're not great for keeping your hands warm. Mittens are better in most cases, unless you have excellent gloves, and many people don't. So what you can do is you can take socks and put socks over your hands. And that's fine for, sitting around and talking to family members or reading the Bible and whatnot, that you can cover your hands with socks. And that's better because the hands stay warmer when the fingers aren't isolated. The feet are best kept warm with at least 2 pairs of socks. So a thin pair of socks and then a warm pair of socks over that is usually the best because, again, the layers help. And then we should wear, even though we're in the house, we should either wear shoes or a slipper like this one with a hard sole because the floor is cold. And, when we're in a power outage, we have to think like we're outside. We can't act like we do when we have power and heat and all that. We have to think as if we're living outside even though we're inside, and think of our house more like a tent. Now, again, I said that it's wise to get the whole family into one room. So we would drag mattresses in or what have you. Another thing you can do is if you have a tent, you can set up the tent in that room for the children in particular. So say you have a pup tent and you have a couple of kids. Well, you can set up the pup tent in the house, in the room, and have the children go in there, and their body heat will keep them warm. It will be warmer than if they weren't in the tent. Or what you can do is you can tack blankets along the wall above the mattress and then pull that over the mattress like a triangle, and that will form a kind of a pup tent as well. And children enjoy making these kinds of things. It can be a fun project for them to work on, especially on day 2 of the power outage. What I would say about children and power outages is this, is that they can be useful and helpful, or they can become a problem because they're bored, because they're upset or worried about what's happening. The best way to deal with that is to keep the children involved in what's happening and contributing to the survival of the family. There's nothing better for developing self-respect than having an important role that's valued in the family. And when we teach our children that what they're doing is important for the rest of the family, then they're not going to be all whiny and upset for the most part. The other thing we can do is have healthy, fun activities to keep us busy while we're cooped up in that one room. Things like games of charades or word games or guessing games. Things like reading aloud to one another. Sharing memories is another way. Things like crafts. And one craft I can think of offhand is that if you don't have sleeping bags, but you have embroidery thread and embroidery needles, what you can do is you can sew together blankets so that you have sleeping bags. And of course, sleeping bags are better than just plain blankets because there's no drafts coming in when you move around when you're sleeping. So these are the kinds of things that we could help our children to learn. First of all, personal responsibility and social responsibility, as well as how to be creative and contribute to the family's well-being rather than to simply feel spoiled and entitled that you don't have, the things that you usually do. We want to model these things for our children as well. In terms of layering clothing, we would have a base layer that's close to the skin, a second layer that's warm, if possible, and then my sisters, we would wear, of course, a thick, warm skirt like corduroy or wool over the other 2 layers with our double socks and our thick slippers on, and over our base layer, our sweatshirt and our wool sweater, then we could put on a jacket or a coat. Now, not everyone in the South or in the United States has like a down coat or a down jacket, but any kind of warm jacket that you have over layers will work well. because the layers help. But if you have something like a down coat or a down jacket, of course you can put that on. If you have to go outside, what I would recommend is to think about as if it were raining, because anything that breaks rain from getting onto your body will also break the wind. And often in power outages, it's a condition of severe wind or ice. And you don't want to go out and get wet. You'll freeze to death very quickly if you get wet. So a rain slicker over your coat and your other layers will help a lot. And that's what we want to do. We want to stay dry. We want to stay warm. There are various foods that are particularly good for maintaining body heat. So carbohydrates and oil, fats, are particularly good for keeping the body warm. A power outage is not the time to start worrying about your weight. Believe me, you're going to burn a lot more calories when you're cold. So you want to make sure to eat things like crackers and peanut butter, crackers and cheese, hard-boiled eggs, which can be prepared in advance, by the way. But all of these things that we would eat, we would want to think about getting enough calories in order for us to be able to generate heat. Glory be to God. So I hope that these various ideas about safety and staying warm in a winter power outage have been helpful to you. I remain here for you. Feel free to email me if you have further ideas that you'd like to share. You can comment in the comment section below as well. Or, just know that I'm praying for you. My brothers and my sisters, those of you who are going through this or have gone through this, I think it's time for us all to kind of wake up and smell the coffee at this point. That how things were are not necessarily how they are always going to be. We want to become more self-reliant and be prudent about protecting our families to the degree that we are able. So let's turn to Proverbs chapter 6. And I'll close with this passage, which is kind of a funny passage in a way when you think about it. So Proverbs chapter 6, starting in verse 6. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. So, we want to be prudent, we want to be wise, we want to do what we can to prepare for life to be a little bit different than it has been in times past. Knowing that God is our provider, that He will show us the way, He will provide for us, but He also expects us to do what we can to be wise and prudent ourselves. May this message be a blessing to all who hear it. I remain here for you. Again, feel free to email me. My email is always in the description box underneath the video. And may the word of the Lord go forth today and edify many. In Jesus' precious name, amen.